Our water connection acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia and their connection to country, sky, water, and community. We extend our respect to the traditional custodians of the place where you are listening. This episode is recorded in Kaurna Country and Aerotropolis Country. How can water be the key to cooling down our cities and make them more livable? What simple steps can you take at home to use water for a cooler and a greener space? Today, we explore the connection between water, livability, urban climate resilience, and of course, cooling. My name is Jess Borges. I'm on a mission to increase your water curiosity, and this is A Water Connection. To explore the role that water has in cooling our cities, our communities, and our houses, I'm honored today to have a chat with Greg Ingleton. Greg is the segment manager for circular economy at Sydney Water. He started his career in agribusiness, but then joined the water industry over 20 years ago. And he has influenced the connection between water and livability through both on-ground, very practical demonstration projects and identifying and quantifying the benefits of water for greening and cooling to enable livability to be embedded in corporate strategies as well. After 18 years at SA Water, Greg is now at Sydney Water, focusing on recycled water and the development of one of the largest integrated water cycle management projects in the world, the Aerotropolis scheme in Western Sydney, which we will talk a little bit today. Greg also focused on part of his time on developing smart water solutions for cooling and greening across several states in Australia. Welcome to A Water Connection, Greg.
Thank you, Jess. Nice to be here.
Thanks. Look, I normally start with a question that immediately introduces the topic. But before we start talking specifically on cooling, can you explain to us what is the connection between water and urban livability?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting one because water's always been part of our urban sort of fabric for drinking and toilet flushing and showering and cooking and all of that sort of thing. And it's a really interesting concept that previously the water utilities, their mandate was in public health to, for sewer management and all those sorts of water related activities. And it's now sort of morphed into what else can water do in an urban context to actually protect human health. And it's basically the ability to use water for cooling. And the way it works, it's just biology really. If you've got water in the soil, that water then goes into the plants, the trees, the grass, whatever it might be, and it gets cooled down while it goes through the vegetation, and then that vegetation breathes out the cooler air. And at the same time, so that's transpiration, and at the same time you've got evaporation occurring out of the soil. So you've got this moisture going into the air. It's cool, and it basically just cools down the air around that vegetation and where that moisture is in the soil. On the flip side, if you have a park that has native trees in it, for instance, and it doesn't have any water in the soil profile, there's not that much cooling going on because your native trees don't transpire as much. They're built for drought tolerance, basically. They're, in a dry country. And so there's less cool air being breathed out, so less transpiration, and there's no evaporation happening from the soil because there's no moisture in the soil. So yeah, that's the sort of the difference. And if you've got a concrete area or something like that, then that's just hot. That's radiating heat off it, and it doesn't allow any sort of cooling to occur.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. That's very important. Certainly, I think that the connection that you make with water for drinking and sanitation services, which is one part, but also taking it the next level up. And then what is the impact that has in cooling our cities? And that's my next question. It was you already touched on how water helps actually cooling through the process of getting the plants to absorb some of that water. But what role does this cooling part plays, for example, in urban climate resilience, in preparing the cities for a future where probably temperatures are going to be higher and in some places, of course, precipitation will be lower?
Yeah, that's a good question. From a city level, we've got to manage our water in the right way so that we've got enough water for our basic needs, showering and drinking and all the other stuff. But we also need to have water available to keep our parks, our street trees, our backyards green and cool. From a urban design perspective, it's really quite important to be able to keep as much water in the environment as possible. So when it rains, let's not put big stormwater pipes in and just rush it down to the nearest creek, and it erodes out that creek and then, washes out into the ocean and has a pretty much a negative impact all the way through that cycle. Whereas the ability to keep that water as close to where it falls as possible, let it absorb into the soil, let it become a bit of a reservoir for the soil profile to then support vegetation growth and irrigation into the future. And next few weeks or next few months, that's a really important part of how we design urban areas. Simple things like rain gardens and different ponds and having open space to allow the water to permeate into the soil profile is really quite important. Concrete, bitumen, those sorts of surfaces, if we can minimize those or use permeable pavements, then we can start to, again, let that water go into the soil profile, and then the trees and things around it can actually access that water. So it really is about trying to change the way that we design our towns, our new developments, with a focus on keeping as much water in the environment as possible, but also being able to harvest either stormwater or recycled water to use those for that purpose. And I love recycled water, and I know that a lot of cities around the world and in Australia are moving towards treating that recycled water to a drinking water quality and putting it back into the drinking water network, which is a good incentive, absolutely. But if there's the ability to do that, but also do recycled water as well, and using that water in its less treated form, so it's still got the nutrients and trace elements in it, to be able to put that onto parks and open spaces, there's a real benefit in that, because you're not only getting the water that you need, you're avoiding the treatment to an extent, and you're also keeping those nutrients and trace elements in that water.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's really important to look into that and the different uses that recycled water can have. So at the moment, it's mostly used for like irrigation and other uses. And then some places in Australia are starting to look into what's the next step to use it for drinking purposes. But like it almost has other benefits if we use it for the stuff that we're using it at the moment, or to just recirculate it in our cities to help with this all cooling and keeping our soil moist and helping our cities to be a bit cooler. And definitely I resonate with what you say. We need to change a little bit the switch on how we think about water in the cities, not trying to just kind of get it out of the way as quick as possible, which is the traditional way of looking at it. But what can we do to actually keep the benefits there? And we had a conversation with Mel Bradley not so long ago around that topic, and like it's really interesting to see that change of shift. And I'm interested to know, like, in this kind of I say new, but I know it's not really that new, to think about designing our cities and planning for our cities like that. What are some of the biggest challenges that you think are out there for making this a reality?
I think the biggest challenge really is our traditional approach being difficult to change. So all standards, people's capabilities are really based on those traditional approaches. And so to be able to make that shift to less hard infrastructure, so less concrete, let's look at doing things a little bit differently, trying to work within the environment, within the contours of the environment, within the constraints and opportunities within in the environment, rather than taking a traditional engineering approach of, we can just modify it, we can just concrete that, change it, whatever
Yeah.
the approach might be. So I think we've really got to start, and Mel Bradley's done some excellent work on this, just trying to educate people on what is the alternative. Don't be scared of it. It might be new, but don't be scared. And actually, it may actually be cheaper to build and cheaper to operate into the future, regardless of the other benefits. If we can start to get that thinking out there as bring that more to mainstream, I think we can make some significant changes. But there's a role play for a lot of people. It's the councils, it's the universities of what they're teaching. It's the standards that are in the typical standards or council standards. So there's there's a number of different players that just need to switch a
Yeah.
little. It's not a huge
Yeah.
amount,
To just
just a little.
Yeah, just evolve a little bit. And I think you touched on something very important is at the universities, because the more you can embed these concepts in the new engineers and the new professionals you're training, the more it's going to slowly trickle down into the industry as well to try to get them to see it in a different way, which I started seeing a little bit when I was at uni. So that's really good. This was kind of at a city level, right? If we start thinking about what could we do in our own homes, which we also had a chat about that the other day, for people that might be listening about what could I do in my own house, what are some practical ways that people could start using water to cool their own houses, their garden, and maybe even lower some of their electricity consumption?
That's a nice topic, actually, and one that just as a bit of a backstory, when I used to have a lovely house down near the beach at Semaphore in Adelaide, and it was old. It was a 130-year-old house. And I remember I was getting into the CRC for water sensitive cities and talking about urban cooling and water for cooling. And I stood there one day and I thought, well, how did they used to stay cool 100 years ago before air conditioning,
Yeah.
130 years ago? And so I started experimenting around the house and put little sort of just Bunnings temperature, the thermometers and different sort of, cheap Bunnings, sorry, nondescript hardware equipment around the place, and it was like $10 or $20 each piece of equipment, and just to get a bit of a gauge on what's happening and what can I do to change it. And there were some simple things, and it was also watching what happens with my neighbours as well, and how they sort of work. And what I was observing was on really hot days, people would get home, they go inside, they turn their air conditioner on, then they go outside, put the sprinkler on or the hose, and they'd start, hosing and throwing water around all over the place. And that was on the really hot day. And at the same time, I was starting to use a smart irrigation program that was designed for farming, for agriculture. But I was trying to adopt it to the urban context, to use in
Yeah.
parks and ovals and things like that, to be able to save water for the councils. And what that had in it had a bunch of thousands of different algorithms. But what it did, and it was a really interesting thing from an agricultural perspective, it didn't wait until that hot day to put the water on. It put the water on
Mhm.
2 days beforehand. And what that does is the water then gets into your soil profile. Your plants are healthy. They've taken that water in for the last 2 days. They're robust. They're ready to go. They're ready for that heat wave. And farmers do it because they don't want all of their produce dropping off the trees or whatever because of that hot
Yeah.
day. They want to make it quite resilient. And so just doing that within my own home, I found that I was using wastewater because I was putting it on at the right time, a couple of days before the heat wave. The interesting thing is then I put my SA water hat at the time on and thought, okay, what will that mean for our network? And what it means is that our networks were always built for you've got your average demand or your high demand, but then you've got your peak day demand, which is another 30% higher. And if you're able to design your networks to not that peak demand, but the high demand, you could save 30% in your capital investment. And so I started thinking about it from that perspective, then looked at the electricity costs. And on those really hot days, the price of electricity went from $150 a kilowatt hour to a megawatt hour to, I think it was like 15,000 or something. It was a couple of orders of magnitude, huge. And that's not when the water utility wants to be pumping water and treating water and trying to, get water out into the
Get
network.
water to people. Yeah.
And the electricity companies don't want people, don't want their water utility to be using a lot of energy at that time as well. So to be able to put the water on and just a couple of days before, smooth that peak, good for your garden, good for your cooling, because then you're getting cooling leading up to that heat wave as well. Your plants are cooling. There's a lot of evapotranspiration going on, and the utilities are happier as well because they're not designing for those peak days that you don't really need to design for. So that was just one aspect of it. But the other part of it was then to look at sort of not monetizing it, but justifying it. So what I then looked at was, what if I have a green lawn and a green garden? How much cooler is my place going to be? And so, putting some thermometers around my place and then looking at my neighbor's place as well, that's the complete opposite. So they didn't have any irrigation. They had pretty much bare earth. And my place was lovely trees, nice and green, veggie garden, producing food as well. So that was another bonus. And once I started to delve into it a lot more, I worked out that my neighbors were putting their air conditioner on so much more than I was that I ended up saving $200 to $300 per year on my electricity bill just by having a green lawn and a green garden. There's all the other benefits. Getting the kids outside to run around instead of sitting inside with their iPads because it's too hot or dusty to go outside, having that nice environment for them to go and be kids. Putting a sprinkler on so they can run through the sprinkler for a couple of minutes. And even that, and I did have a thermal imaging camera at the time, which is not a, no-name hardware purchasing item, but you can buy the little infrared sort of surface
Yeah.
temperature sensors. And what I found was that I could reduce the temperature by the surface temperature from about 50 degrees down to 20 degrees with the sprinkler being off for
Wow.
1 minute. And then
Yeah.
that translates to cooler air above it. And then half an hour later, it gets back to where it was before and you put the sprinkler on again for half a minute. So just that simple knowing what was happening and not using a stack of water. If it's not about using more water, it's about knowing when and where to put it on, and how much to is really important as well. And then I got into misted systems, and that's how I the story. But I'll quickly go into the misted systems again from the no-name hardware. They're $30 or $40. You put them in. You get out of the shower 1 minute earlier that day, and you can run that misting system for 2 hours. And that misting system takes the temperature outside. So you don't put them in the house, of course. It's just for outside around your entertainment areas or
Yes.
where your kids are playing, whatever. And that'll bring the temperature down by 10 degrees.
Yeah, it's
And
amazing.
so, for a really small investment, and again, not using more water, using the same amount of water, just using it differently. It,
Yeah, I think it's wonderful all the experiments that you have done and that it gives a lot of guidance to people and knowledge about what to do. And as you say, it's not necessarily just dumping a lot of more water and then increasing consumption on the day of the heat wave, which is probably not going to do much, but being plan a little bit ahead and what can you do around your garden to keep it of course alive, because yeah, I have a couple of plants that have died this summer because I forgot to do that on time, and keep your house cooler, because it's fascinating to understand what happened, for example, with your neighbor and the differences between, like, yeah, having something completely concreted or maybe not very green versus having something very green, which is a translation in a bigger scale of what would happen in a city as well. Like if you're in the middle of the city where it's all concrete, it just feels, you can feel the heat coming at you. Or if you're in a nice and shaded street with very healthy trees, you can feel the cooling, and it doesn't require as much aircon as you would need to in your house. So it's fascinating to kind of understand a little bit more of that connection between things. So, Greg, I wanted to ask you, how could communities, like we talk about at a city level, which probably is more at a systems planning, or like, the water utilities and the government of cities planning for the future of cities. We have people in our houses thinking about what to do in their neighbors. How could communities work together to create cooler and greener neighborhoods that benefit them as a small community, maybe not having the impact of a full city?
Interesting question. I haven't seen any great examples where it has been done on that scale. Not to say that it hasn't. It's just not something that I've felt into because I was too busy sort of focusing on the home and then on the city scale. But it's an interesting point because I think that the things that you can do in your home, and I was just going to add one aspect to it, and that was that one other thing that I did in my home to justify the expense of the water to water my garden and lawn was to look at what was the economic value of it. And so I worked out I grew 10 different types of herbs. And if I had have bought those herbs from supermarket each month for every few weeks for cooking, then I would have spent about $350 more than what I would for growing it. And that was pretty much the price of the water to irrigate my whole house. So taking that up a level to the community perspective, if you're able to value it in a way that the community will get that value from it, there'd be ways that there's always the community being able to engage with the council in the different projects, perhaps where there is a project going on, if they're able to influence a change in the way that or if they're doing a park upgrade, for instance, or something along those lines. If the community could get involved to be able to sort of petition that, they need to change from a traditional approach. That's one way. I have seen a couple of examples recently where there was a big brown park and they just upgraded the stormwater system around this beautiful big brown park and put more pipes and more side entry pits at things that upgraded the gutters and so that water can, pretty much tease that park and just go around the edges of it and go off up to the ocean. In the meantime, the trees at everything in the park is sort of
Yeah.
screaming out for that
It's
water.
just,
And
yeah.
and just the simple way, I saw a great example in Canberra where they had castellated curves. So they had curves. They actually they cut bits out of the gutter, and so that water just flowed straight through and straight onto the park. So it meant
Okay.
less stormwater infrastructure downstream. So they didn't have to build the pipes as big because 99% of the water was going into the park. And that was a very green, healthy park in the middle of a hot, dry summer with no irrigation requirements. It was just a simple way, again, to change the engineering approach. I think community gardens and those sorts of things do have a place. There's cooling that can happen there. Even my house, as I said, my house was cool, but my neighbour's wasn't. Now, what would be really interesting is if my neighbour's house was cooler and my neighbour's house was cooler, and then the whole neighbourhood was cooler, would you actually get another couple of degrees or even more
Lower.
cooling
Yeah.
overall over that whole area? And I think that really came down to the education side of it. Now, I did try to educate that neighbour and was talking through the issue of bare earth, that, how bare earth was as hot as the bitumen road next to it. And so he went and bought a stack of white pebbles and that became his front lawn and his front yard. It's just white pebbles after that. Now, that's probably not the best approach because you are still not going to get the cooling that you
The
get from
cooling
vegetation.
effect. Yeah.
But it was a stepper, I suppose. So I bet it cost him more than it would have cost him to put grass down. I won't talk about
Mm.
fake grass. All I can say for fake grass is worst thing ever invented. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Very expensive. Bad for the environment. The
Yeah.
people that
No,
are
it
selling it
makes,
are not actually quite open with their numbers. Yeah. So I think from a community perspective, education is really critical. So if you've got a champion in your community, or you are the champion in the community, you people that are watching, get out there, teach your neighbors, teach people around you about what they can do differently with water to get a better benefit from it, a cooler benefit from it.
that's right. So you listening now have a job to do now. So like work on your house and then educate your our community around you, which I think is very important because that is an area where like every neighbor starts doing that in their house. Surely it has to kind of have an effect around the area where you are. So that's a good way to looking at that middle point between like a big city planning and your house. Greg, as I mentioned during the introduction, part of your work at Sydney Water focuses on one of the largest integrated water cycle management projects in the world, the Aerotropolis scheme in Western Sydney. This initiative really connects everything that we have been talking about by focusing on like how I've seen the stormwater, incorporating recycled water systems, aiming to enhance water resilience in the future, improve waterway health, and reduce urban heat. So like really using water. How can we like maximize the benefits that we have from the water we have available? From your experience so far in this project, what I wanted to ask, what lessons could this project teach the rest of the world and to other cities that are probably going to face similar challenges in terms of water availability, urban heat, and all of these that we have been talking about?
It's a fantastic example of an urban pressure creating an urban solution. And when you look at it from that perspective, just a bit of background, and yeah, I've only been in Sydney Water for 4 years, and my friends and colleagues in here have just been doing a fantastic job for 10 years, trying to get this over the line, and they're quite chuffed that they have now. And what it was the area around the Aerotropolis. So it's the new airport, the Western Sydney Airport, that's happening out here, and the Department for Planning at the time realised that, and their water science branch as well, realised that once this development goes through, so the airport will happen and then there'll be all residential and commercial industrial development happening around what was essentially farmland. So they realized that converting farmland to hard surfaces was going to cause a huge increase in runoff. And that increase in runoff would pretty much erode all the creeks, you know, destroy the waterways in a sense. You're going from less than 1 megalitre per hectare per year of runoff to around about 6 megalitres per hectare per year runoff. Yeah, there's platypus up there. There's bass. There's a lot of native wildlife in and around the creeks from the riparian zones. The government planning and the science department behind it took the view that the only way that the development could sustainably go ahead was that if that water, that stormwater, was harvested before it got into the creeks. And so in Sydney Water, we did some calculations and we looked at, is it better for every one of those developers to have their own on-site stormwater harvesting and reuse system, or should we do a bigger system in general? And it came out, and there were quite a few clever economics firms that looked at the two scenarios and worked out that a regional scheme that had big stormwater basins down in the floodplain or near enough to it, that could capture that water and then put it through a third pipe system to put back to the customers as a non-potable source of water, was the best outcome. And the beauty of it is then it was always recognised that while it is farmland at the moment, it is still hot and in Western Sydney. And just putting more concrete in roads and things into that area and big tin sheds will make it even hotter. And so there's been a number of times where it has been the hottest place in the world. Cover that with development and it's going to be even hotter. And so the best way to deal with the heat is through greening and cooling. And so to be able to do the greening and cooling, they needed a water source. You don't want to be using, every city has a finite volume of water. You don't want to be using good potable water to be throwing on the ground and irrigating when you've got an alternative. So it basically worked out that by harvesting that water to save the creeks, you can then use that water to put in the greening and the cooling and improve the riparian zones around those creeks so they're more robust, and improve livability, reduce energy usage, make it a nicer environment for people to work and live in. So it was just a lovely example of a pressure and a solution coming together to really sort of show what can be done if there's a bit of a different driver. Now, it's expensive to put the stormwater harvesting system in, but it always is. It doesn't matter whether you're harvesting it or whether you're putting big pipes in, there's always a cost to it. So by doing this and having a more long-term view on using the water sustainably and for these other purposes, everybody benefits. So I think the take home for me was that by trying to protect another part of the environment and do something because of this urban pressure, we've had legislation changes and we need to do something different, which has led to this sort of innovative approach, which will then solve a number of other problems. So I think there's a real role to play here for the utility, definitely counts as, and the government, and just looking at, what is the impact of this development? What can we do to minimize that impact? And what opportunities are there as a result of this development? So yeah, I think it's a beautiful example, really.
It is.
Yeah. You take that helicopter view.
Once it's finished, it's just going to be very inspiring for other cities as well to just really take on the challenge of thinking about a new development, which is happening a lot all over Australia. How can we do it differently and having the same and having more benefits even just by taking the time to think in it a slightly different way and making it work. So thanks for sharing that. That was a great example. This episode is proudly supported by the Chris Davis AM Fellowship, an initiative of the Australian Water Association. His legacy lives on through this fellowship, empowering efforts to keep his passion for innovation and community impact alive. We're honored to have the support of this fellowship this season too, as we continue to share stories that connect us all to water. Now, back to the episode. Greg, how would you explain your work if you have a friend that knows nothing about the water sector? How would you explain your work to them?
I have had to do that a few times. It's more about taking more of a holistic systems thinking approach to water. We know
Yes.
we've got very clever engineers and others that know how to put the pipes in, know how to get the drinking water in, and how to get the wastewater out, treat it, do all those things. Uh, my role is to look at what else. What can you do from a non-engineering approach to use water differently and better and improve livability, improve the water cycle, improve the environment, and just improve sort of everybody's quality of life.
Yeah.
Particularly we've got other pressures, climate change, and all of those sorts of things, and what that means. So I sort of think my role is to do the things on the side that the engineers don't necessarily do, and then try and influence through the different channels of taking a different approach. So I love it. It's an interesting role, and it's evolved over time. And the more you learn, the more it evolves, and more people are getting on board with this sort of thing, and we're all sort of coming together now and sharing ideas. So there's an educational. I'll just finish on that part. That there's a real educational part to this as well. Just really simple things that you can teach people, and people want to know. People want to know how to use water better, or how they're going to play in their future, or what's going to happen to their kids in the future. Are we going to run out of water? Are they going to be, not having the same quality of life that we do today? And even the most simplest basic things, and I'll give you one quick example, and that is I had a lot of people come up to me years ago when I was doing a lot of sort of presentations and things to the community. And they said, this is all great about, knowing when to irrigate and all of that, but we don't know how much to put on. And I said, well, just go into your kitchen, get a little glass, a cup, and put that under your sprinkler. And when there's a fingernail full of water, that's enough for the next 2 or 3 days. Simple as that. Like, it was just such a simple thing. And then they think, oh, okay, well, that's something that they can do in their home. So it's knowing what your impact is, but then also in a workplace perspective for all those water professionals out there, what can you do as a person in your workplace to change the way that your workplace is heading?
Yeah.
From your
I love it.
knowledge that you've got at home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great example, like a great description. What else? That's your job, to keep pushing them. What else can we do? And also educate people. That's a great summary. I can see you have answered that question before to people. Greg, there was a little bit of this in the last part of your answer, but what would be your message to young water professionals who might be listening to you right now?
Think outside of the box. Look at
Yep.
if you're given a project, don't just look at that project. Look at how that project will integrate with what's there around it, or what could be there around it in the future. Be really open to new ideas. Do a little bit of research. Go on some tours around the world and see what's happening virtually or in person, to see what's happening in different parts of the world, because you'll always get a little snippet of something. And conferences and those sorts of things, there's always just, one thing that one person will say. You might be at a conference for 3 or 4 days, and there'll be one little gem that someone says, and you go, oh, I could use that in this context. So be open-minded.
Open-minded and think outside of the box. That's awesome. Greg, and to wrap up, why do you work in the water sector?
I like water. I've always liked
Yep.
water. I think it was really because of my previous sort of agricultural background, and then at university focusing on recycled water and wanting to make sure that water utilities were able to use recycled water where possible to its highest extent. So it was that passion really to almost bring the agricultural side of thing into the water industry, and look at how we can keep things alive, keep producing food, and have a good life at the same time. So
Yeah.
and it's a good industry. There's lovely people in this industry. It's a very nice
It is.
industry. It's
It
a
is
nice
a great
family.
industry.
Yes.
Greg, thank you very much for your time today. It was a lovely conversation, like to see things at a different scale. Like, you have a lot of experience from a city planning perspective, from a home perspective. We even like kind of looked a little bit in the middle and learning from some of the stuff that you have been doing in Sydney Water has been very valuable. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jess. Been a pleasure. And good luck, everyone.
Thank
Go and
you.
conquer.
Good luck, everyone, with the irrigation at home and like following Greg's steps.
Yes. Yep. Cool.
That's it today for Water Connection. Thank you for listening and being part of our community. You boys matters to us. So please, there will be a link in the description. Send us a message. Tell us what you learned about what Greg taught us today. And also share this with people, with your neighbors, with your family, with you, with everyone, to learn a little bit more on how we can make a difference in the way that we use water for cooling our houses and our cities. Don't forget to follow us on our favorite podcast platform and social media for any updates, highlights, and many ways to connect. Keep your curiosity flowing, and I'll see you next time.